Thanks for choosing this session to come into. I hope you enjoy it. We have a really distinguished panel before you to talk about self-publishing and the hybrid author. My name is John Bond. I run a writing services business called Whitefox, which is a startup. So the last session was very relevant to me and to us because we're engaged with publishers, agents, brands and writers directly. And one of the observations I would make, having spent my entire working life in reasonably large trade publishers, is that when I left and my information filter became differently, I suddenly realized that I'd worked for over 20 years in a technophobic legacy business. Who knew? And I think one of the things I want to explore today is that I think we're looking at some of the same areas, but through different ends of the telescope. And I think what will link everybody in the session today is that they will all be talking about everything from the author's perspective. And I think that's really fascinating. So just on process and form, it's going to follow a very similar format to the last session. Sorry about that. In this room, which is that I will do a very brief introduction of the speakers. They will speak for 3 to 5 minutes on self-publishing and hopefully also bringing up this whole issue of the hybrid author. I will put some questions to them and we will discuss them, and then I want to have some time at the end, which I know we haven't had in all sessions, but some time at the end to open it up to Q&A. So, people. Okay, Sophie Rochester is the founder of the literary platform, which describes itself as being dedicated to showcasing projects experimenting at the intersection of literature and technology. She's also the brains behind the writing platform, a free online resource for all writers who are looking for the best practical information on writing in the digital age.
Hi. Am I kicking off?
You're kicking off.
Okay. Hi. So my background is also traditional publishing. I've worked at a couple of digital agencies in the past, and in 2009 we set up the literary platform really to try and collate all of the information that we were hearing about what was happening in the publishing industry at the intersection of where it was working with technology. And sort of in 2008, 2009, there was lots and lots of digital conferences, often crossing paths with Kate Pullinger, who's a Canadian writer and is now Professor of Creative Writing and Digital Media at Bath Spa University. And we were all really often struck at how few authors there were at these big conferences discussing the future of the book. And we decided that we would try and counteract that by creating a kind of sister site to the literary platform called the Writing Platform, which could act as a kind of neutral place for writers to find out about digital and about the way technology was impacting on the way that they worked. So with government funding from the UK Arts Council England, we've managed to launch this website, which is at thewritingplatform.com. And one of the first things that we did was to survey around 500 writers around their digital needs. Around 70% of these were already published. Some of them described themselves as published and self-published. And the others were self-published. And I think from the survey results, one of the things that we found the most kind of striking was the desire of writers to work collaboratively. That was one of the big things that really came out of the survey. And I think this was one of the things that we really wanted to try and find out a bit more about. We've created these bursaries, which again are public funded from a different government fund, which are to enable writers who might not have access to a technologist or a digital person to work with them over a 3 to 6 month period. So we're trying to roll that programme out at the moment. And I think very often it's very easy when you're in a kind of London sort of digital bubble to think that all writers will know a developer or a technology person. And in fact, there are many writers who are really interested in extending their practice and don't really know where to start, first of all. So that's kind of one of our motivations to try and extend that. One of the other things that came through in the survey, which was quite interesting, was that in trying to find out about opportunities for development for their writing, 85% of writers are looking at websites and fewer than 10% are looking at their publisher websites. Now, there might be quite obvious reasons for this. It might be that they don't want to be asking their publisher about new business models. They might not want to be asking their publisher about what it means to self-publish. But it's quite a striking kind of statistic that they're not going to publishers for this kind of information. So what we hope to do from this site is basically encourage more writers to kind of extend their creative practice. I think looking back at the last 4 years, the most experimental authors really that we've seen have been probably the dead ones. So Dickens, Shakespeare, Orwell, Shelley are all doing very well and doing lots of kind of experimentation in this area. But what we really want to do is try and get more living writers experimenting with technology.
And can I ask a question? Thanks. Do you think that the writers that you're speaking to are more open to the idea of having a different relationship with their publisher?
Yes, and I think, to be fair to publishers, I think the shift change is not just with writers. I think all publishers are more interested in this area as well. So, you know, the best kind of relationship is where a writer is teaming up with an equally interested editor. And so I think but I do think they are kind of fearful of, to take Neil Gaiman's analogy this morning of the dandelion approach. That scattergun approach works very well if you haven't got an agent and a publisher that might be very worried about you putting your work out in all sorts of different places. It works very well if you're a writer and you're experimental and you haven't got an agent that wants to know what cut they're going to be getting out of it. So I think the issues for the sort of the hybrid author, to use that term, are that you might still be adhering to quite a traditional process for your novels, but you might be looking to expand your practice in more experimental platforms. And how do those two things sit together?
Thank you. Mark Coker, I don't know whether he would describe himself as this, but is something of a superstar in the self-publishing world. He founded Smashwords in 2008 to change the way that books are published, marketed and sold. Since then, it's become the world's largest distributor of self-published ebooks, serving indie authors, small presses, and literary agents, distributing over 200,000 ebooks. Mark.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. I started Smashwords in 2008 with the mission to make it fast, free, and easy for any writer or any publisher anywhere in the world to instantly publish any book for free. In 2009, we expanded into distribution, so we began distributing our books to major retailers, such as Barnes & Noble, Sony, Kobo, then 2010, Apple. So our primary business is distribution. I think this is a really exciting time to be involved in publishing, whether you're a writer or a publisher. When I look back at 5 years ago when we first started, I see it as the dark ages of publishing. It was a time when publishers controlled the printing press, they controlled the access to retail distribution, and they controlled the knowledge of what's necessary to be a professional publisher. And so today, all of that is becoming democratized. The printing press is now in the cloud. It's free and it's available to everyone. The distribution, especially around ebooks, is free and democratized. Every major retailer wants to carry self-published books. They don't care if you're backed by a publisher or not. And then the third point, the knowledge of professional publishing, the best practices of professional publishing are now becoming free and available to everyone. In fact, I would argue that many of the best practices of professional publishing are now being pioneered by these self-published authors who are out there experimenting, out there just doing lots of silly things, making lots of mistakes, but stumbling upon the most brilliant methods for connecting books with authors.
Thanks. Mark, do you think, despite everything you've said, there's still a stigma around self-published authors if they don't have that association with that logo on the spine of their book?
There is to some extent, but it's interesting to look at how things have changed over the last 5 years. So 5 years ago, self-publishing was viewed as the option of last resort. It was viewed as the option for failed authors and failed writers, that if you couldn't get a traditional publishing deal, you were a failure. And in some senses, that was true, because without the distribution access that a publisher offered you, you weren't going to reach a lot of readers with a print book. But now that's no longer true. You don't need a publisher to reach lots of readers. So we're seeing the stigma associated with self-publishing is just dissolving. It's dissipating very quickly as we see self-published authors go on to become bestsellers at all the retailers, to hit the New York Times bestseller lists, to hit all of the bestseller lists. They're inspiring the next generation of writers. And they're sharing information. You go onto any writer's message board, and they're sharing best practices information. They're sharing the experimentation that they've done and what's working and what's not. So the best practices are advancing very quickly. What I see happening over the next couple of years is that we're going to see an increased stigma associated with traditional publishing. We're already seeing it today. We're already seeing authors sitting around a table, and one of the writers is saying, okay, I want to get a traditional publishing deal, and the fellow indie authors are saying, why? Why would you bother? Or people who say, I got a deal, and their fellow indie authors are saying, oh, I'm so sorry. Because the self-published ebook authors have learned that they have the ability to outcompete, out-distribute, and outsell the large publishers, because they're learning how to publish professional quality books that are as good or better than what the big New York and London publishers are putting out, but they're offering their product at a price that's much, much lower than what the traditional publishers are putting out. So they have a dramatic competitive advantage in the marketplace.
So can I just push a bit further on that? What do you think is the long-term prognosis for that? What's the logical extension of that? Where will it end up?
Well, it's going to create some really interesting dynamics here in the next few years. All of us who are in the business of helping authors connect their books to readers, we are all middlemen, we are all intermediaries, and if we don't add significant value for the author and significant value for the reader, then we're all going to go extinct. There are very strong Darwinian forces at play here. And so there's great opportunity for publishing professionals, for publishers to add significant value and to become even more successful in the future of the book. But you need to innovate, you need to be efficient, and you can't be a parasite on the system.
Great, thank you. Mark Lefebvre, and I've been practicing that, is the Director of Self-Publishing and Author Relations at Kobo, where he's responsible for various aspects of content acquisition, publisher and agent relations, and vendor management. He's also a writer who writes under the name of Mark Leslie.
It's funny, you talked about stigma earlier. I self-published my first book of short stories back in 2004, when a writer would have been as likely to stand up on stage and say, hey everybody, I masturbate. So I'm quite familiar with the stigma of self-publishing. We launched Kobo Writing Life in July of last year, sort of in response to a need from our writers. We had worked with self-published authors from day one of Kobo. If you could provide files to us in a proper format and were willing to deal with the intricacies of dropping files on an FTP, you were in. The challenge, of course, is it was difficult. Folks like Mark made it very, very easy for authors such as myself and thousands and thousands of authors around the world to get their books into Kobo's catalog as well as other catalogs. So we already had a great way of getting content from self-published authors, but there were authors who wanted to be able to work directly. So we were responding to the need to say, yes, you can go through an aggregator or you can go through Kobo. I like to say we love authors no matter how they come to us, whether they're coming from a traditional publisher, whether they're coming from an amazing aggregator like Smashwords, or whether they're coming to us directly through Kobo Writing Life. We love them. What we're in the business of is putting books in front of the right readers, the right books in front of the right readers, and it has been an absolute thrill and pleasure at these 8 months to be able to watch authors come in, to make it easy for them to get in if they wanted to go directly with us, and to give them the tools that they wanted. We spent 6 months listening to what authors wanted. As an author myself who's familiar with the platforms, and I publish my work on all the platforms, so you can buy it from Kobo, you can buy it from Smashwords, you can buy it from the other retailers out there. I would strongly suggest a strategy for authors, besides writing a really, really good book, is the dandelion theory isn't just what you're going to do and how you're going to experiment with spreading ideas, but it's making your work available everywhere, because you're not sure where those writers are, where those readers are going to be. And that goes the same for embracing hybrid. I work with 3 traditional publishers and have books out with them, but I also self-publish. And I know that there are particular projects that are ideal for the publishers I work with, and those are the projects that I work with them on. And there are projects that are ideal for me to do on my own, because, as Mark said, you know, in some ways I can outmaneuver the way that it would work in that other relationship. So I just really think this is an amazingly exciting time for authors and publishers and retailers.
Thanks, Mark. So what, before the publishers in the room start slitting their wrists, what is it that publishers can give you that you can't get from self-publishing, do you feel, at the moment?
Well, I mean, one of the reasons, so one of my books, Haunted Hamilton, is a local interest Canadian city book which focuses on ghost stories. And Dundurn Press has an amazing line of supernatural ghost story books. And so it fit quite nicely in with what they were doing already. But one of the things that I can say, I could have gone print on demand and had it distributed through Lightning Source and available on all major retailers, which I've done with other self-published projects. But they got my book into Costco. Costco is a wholesaler in North America. There's no way I could have gotten my book onto the shelves beside the major bestsellers in my local Costco. There's no way I could have gotten that distribution. So it was a very easy thing to see that working with them on that line of books was a very, very intelligent move, whereas some self-published authors would say, what are you talking about? You're only getting 8% for every book that sells. You can have 70 yourself. That is true, but not so true about those. I can get 70% of zero for the ones that I sell through Costco on my own.
And what about, I mean, are you finding, or Kobo finding, that they need to offer self-published authors more tools, more services, and how's that evolving?
I think what's interesting is as more authors embrace both traditional publishing and self-publishing, they recognize that sometimes their self-published books can help their traditional books sell more. A book that has gone out of print, for example, and the rights revert back to the author, particularly when they're writing a series, it's not economically feasible for the publisher to print 5,000 copies just to sell 1,000 copies. They're not going to make money doing that, and publishers need to make money. That's important. But it may be economically feasible for the author to self-publish that, spend money on the editorial and spend money on the cover design so it's actually an attractive product, and sell those 1,000 copies and make their money back, which will in turn help new readers discover that author potentially, because as Mark said, it's probably at a lower price point, so the cost of entry is a little bit easier for new readers, and those readers may go on to read the books, other books published by a traditional publisher for the same author. So I think there's things that can work both ways.
Great, thanks. Finally, Stina Holmes describes herself on her website as an author, a wife, a mother, and a chocoholic.
Yes.
Her novel, Finding Emma, won the 2012 National Indie Excellence Award for Best Fiction. She's a passionate champion of self-published authors and has a book being published with Amazon, and it is where on the bestseller list?
Number 5.
Number 5. Congratulations, which is fantastic. Okay, Steve.
I started out self-publishing and I became a hybrid author, but my heart will always be in self-publishing, and I plan to use the two combined to find my readers, and I think that's my whole focus, my whole goal as an author. It's very interesting to be here and to listen in all the sessions I've been in from this morning in the panels that finding readers is what's crucial, and it's something that I started off knowing that I had to do. I wrote a book that was in a different market than others that I had self-published, and I knew I had to find that market. I had to find my readers, and once I could find my readers, I knew that I could possibly find success. And within my first month, I made $10,000, and then I went on to make another $100,000. Then I got agents and editors contacting me and wanting to work with me, and became as much as I love self-publishing, I love the idea of partnering with a publisher and finding more readers, because that's my whole goal. I want to write to find readers, to share my stories, as every author wants to do, whether it's through Kobo or Amazon or Smashwords. It doesn't really matter. Wherever my readers are, that's where I want to be.
So are you finding, and not just with you, but with other self-published authors, that they're saying, I just want to write, I just want to have time to write and not get involved in some of the other, marketing, distribution? Do you think that's, or has that changed forever in terms of self-publishing?
I think personally, and I know the different writing groups I'm in, I love having my hands in the marketing. And I love, I have a publicist, but I work hand in hand with her. I love knowing what she's doing, but I also give her ideas of what I want to do. Mark mentioned that as self-published authors, we share everything. So we'll share that this worked for me and this didn't work, and don't go with these distributors, or maybe do this. And we talked about bundling earlier in one of the sessions. We do that already. That's something we were already a step ahead in doing that, knowing that it works because it worked wonderfully for other authors. So I like having my hands in the pie, and I like mingling with it and seeing what all will work.
And if you were to be starting out on your writing journey, publishing journey, what would you do differently, knowing what you know now?
Honestly, I don't think there's much I would do differently, because I made sure that I was fully equipped before I took this step. I didn't just decide to one day self-publish because my books weren't selling, or because I couldn't get an agent. I knew where my goal was, I knew what my dreams were, and I knew that there was going to have to be steps for me to take to get there. And so I did research, and I looked, and I watched other, my favorite authors, and I watched what they did, and I watched what didn't work for them and what did work for them. And I knew, bottom line, knowing who my readers were, and so that was my whole focus. Going to them, finding out who they were, what they like to read, knowing who they are, because if I can grab their attention, then I know I have them, which was crucial for me.
Brilliant, thank you, all of you. So I'd just like to ask a few questions to people generally, and then we'll open the floor up, because I'm sure people will have questions that they want to ask. So do you think it's inevitable, thinking about traditional publishers, that they are going to have to compromise or soften their positions on the deals that they do with authors in the future, the rights that they acquire, how they work with publishers, with authors? Do you think that's inevitable? Mark?
Well, I'll share a couple comments there. Publishers have always been the primary venture capitalists behind writers, investing a lot of money, a lot of talent into helping, good books become great books. I think it's inevitable that the publishers are going to have to transfer more of the risk to the writers, because the publishers need to figure out how to take more risks. If we go back to the dandelion strategy, publishers need to figure out a way to adopt a different attitude about how they're going to work with writers. Right now, most publishers have an attitude that the vast majority of writers suck, that your job, your value add is to curate and to only publish the very best works. But the problem is most publishers who are really in the business of selling books, not publishing books, value books based on perceived commercial merit, but books are more valuable than that, and writers are writing for reasons different than just making money. As we've heard already, it's about reaching readers. So publishers are going to have to change their model a little bit, figure out a way to embrace all writers, to respect all writers, even if they're going after smaller markets, and share some of the risk with writers.
Anybody else?
I think writers are more willing to take the risks. We know what's involved. We know that it could flop, but we'll learn from it, and we'll know what to do better next time. I think we're much more open and willing to take those risks.
I would argue that the writer's not taking as much of a risk because you know your audience better than your
Yes,
publisher
that's true.
will ever know your audience, because you're honed right in on that, and they're probably looking at a much bigger picture. So it may look, you're experimenting and you're
Right,
trying
yes.
new things, but you're not taking as much of a risk because you have done the calculations necessary to do it properly and to fail fast,
Yes.
which happens, right? Because you can fail 5 times this morning and nobody noticed, and then on the 6th one they said, "Oh my God, she's an overnight sensation," which does happen.
Yeah, I just think the key word there is overheads as well. I mean, as a small business, we're looking at our overheads the entire time, and trying to experiment in a position where you have the overheads of a large conglomerate publisher is very different to a self-published author experimenting at home in their home office. And I think in terms of taking risks, I think you look at a company as big as Random House taking a risk on a new platform with a small developer like Fell Better Games with an author that no one has ever heard of. I think things like that really demonstrate that actually publishers are taking risks when they can. It's just sometimes they're not in a position to be able to.
One of the challenges is that publishers will need to take more risks, but at the same time, they need to increase the royalties that they're paying writers on a per unit basis. Because the self-published writers are saying, look, I can self-publish my ebook and I can make 100% net, yet you're only offering me 25% net. What are you going to do for me that I can't do for myself? So that's both a threat and an opportunity for publishers. If publishers can communicate the value that they're going to deliver and actually execute on that, then they've got a really bright place.
Okay, I just want to ask one more thing, which, again, to everybody, what the massive move in this, in the whole self-publisher area has obviously been Penguin's acquisition of Author Solutions. And I'm interested to know what people think about that, but also what they think the implications are going forward, whether that's just going to be a model that's replicated and other publishers are going to do the same thing, or really just to open up that to debate.
Can I kick off on this? I mean, this is actually partly our motivation for opening up the writing platform, in that not just Penguin's acquisition of Author Solutions, but just this kind of huge surge of author services springing up. And there's that kind of off-cited statistic that 85% of Americans want to write a book. And I think, it's quite easy to be cynical about some of the services that are springing up in order to serve the needs of writers in this way. So I think one of the things we are trying to do on the site is to try and balance when do you need services and when are you being exploited. I think that's...
Do you want to use the parasite word?
Yeah.
I know Mark's. Anyway. Mark?
Yeah. First I should state that I am a strong believer that writers who are going to be a self-published author must take the risks that publishers previously took. That means they need to invest in their book, invest in editing, packaging, and everything involved in getting the book out to readers that publishers once did. But that said, Pearson Penguin's acquisition of Author Solutions, I think, was a horribly bad move for Pearson Penguin. And I think they not only damaged their reputation among the writing community, but I think they damaged the reputation of the entire traditional publishing industry. Author Solutions is famous in the United States for exploiting authors, for engaging in deceptive marketing practices, and for basically acting as a parasite. I think it's criminal that an author services company would gladly take 10 or 15,000 pounds from a writer to help them get their book out there, and selling them marketing packages and video trailer packages and the opportunity to meet with Hollywood agents or Hollywood film producers. It's a massive ripoff, because most of those authors aren't going to earn their money back. They're taking money from writers that can't afford to give up that money. They're preying on the hopes and dreams of people when they're most vulnerable. when a writer is getting ready to publish a book, it's like a mother getting ready to give birth to a baby. And there are many writers out there, you know, if they were stuck in a burning building, might grab their manuscript before they grab their baby. So you need to understand that these people are ripe for exploitation, and if you do exploit them, then you're just being a really, really bad player. So I think it was a mistake to acquire that company. It was smart of Penguin Pearson to realize that there's opportunity for publishers to make money in self-publishing, but it demonstrated, I think, a really cynical understanding of the publishing environment, that the only way to make money off of writers is to sell them stuff rather than focusing on selling their books. And there's a massive, radical difference there. Because if you go back to what's always been great about the greatest publishers, they invest in a writer and they help that writer sell books, reach readers, and the money flows from the publisher to the writer. The money should never flow from the writer to the publisher, in my opinion.
I think that's critical, and this is where in 140 character sound bites you can be misinterpreted, because I think we all strongly believe that an author who is self-publishing needs to be invested in their work, needs to invest in making it the best possible product. If you're going to be the publisher, you have to be the publisher. So that's critical. But then tailoring that with but be careful, because there's vultures out there who will rape you and gladly take all of your money, knowing that you're not going to make anything off of it, and all the money was exchanged the wrong way. The key thing, and this is really, really tricky, is helping writers understand that investing in their work is good, investing in editorial and cover, or in investing through writer communities. There may even just be ways you can get some of those services from other professionals you work with, trading in kind. But looking for those things, I think one of the things that we have to do is try to help authors decide what's best for them, which potential services are out there, and how can you find those services in such a way that you will invest but make more back than you invest, because you will make your money back in sales. And sales is a key thing. I mean, at Smashwords, you make money when you sell the author's product. At Kobo, we make money when we sell the content that is there for readers. So for us, it's critical that we help authors make sure that they're publishing the best possible book that they can, so that they can make as much money as possible on that product. And I cry every time I hear or I encounter authors every day who come up and tell me that they've dropped $10,000, $15,000 or pounds on a product, and they have a book that is sitting in their basement, or a digital file that is not selling anywhere. It's really, really sad.
That they can't pay off now.
Exactly.
That they're in debt because they got suckered. And one of the challenges here, and it's the sad reality, is that most self-published books don't sell well. They're not going to sell well, just like most traditionally published books don't sell well either. So it's really difficult to pay money and invest in these things that you know you need, yet earn a return. So it puts the service providers in a really difficult position. How am I going to provide you a service that I know is a well-valued service, but that you as the writer or the author won't feel ripped off, that you invested $2,000 or $3,000 in editing, but you're only going to sell $500 worth of books?
I'd just like to add one final thing before we open that up, as somebody that runs a writing services business. I think one of the things that's happened also as a result of the changes over the last few years is writers have been empowered to see what value they place on things that quite traditionally within publishers were hidden from view. So some of those skills, there's an article Alison Babisott wrote in The Guardian, I think, where he was saying that, it's the time for the copy editor again. They're back because it's important, it's incredibly valuable. And I think one of the things we'll see is whatever the price of that is, whatever the value of that is, it will become clearer, I think, over the next few years. We've got about 5 minutes, I think. Can we Any questions? Is there a mic, I think? He's just here.
Hi there. Hi there, everyone. This is Andre from Nielsen. I would like to, it's half a question and half a statement, only because I haven't heard it. But if I was to say that perhaps many retailers driving the self-publishing model are perhaps less interested in authors and more interested in selling devices or acquiring market share, actually, does anybody have any views on that?
Okay, well, I work for a retailer that sells devices, but there's no money in devices. The money's in the content. That's the only place where we're actually making revenue. So it's important for us to have the right content. And again, the trick is delivering it to the right people. Because the last thing you want to do is sell content to somebody who doesn't come back to buy more content, whether it's an author brand or whether it's a publisher brand.
Unless you're Apple. Apple makes money on
They make
devices.
money in devices, yeah, of course.
Right.
Sorry.
Hello, my name is Tom. Do you know what should be the role of the publisher in the future if most of the things can be sourced out for self-publishers? What should be the main role of the publisher?
It was mentioned this morning, the main role of the publisher, I think, is providing those services that they've always provided, bringing them out to the forefront so an author understands, and I think Robert Levine said it this morning, I mean, the value is not in chopping down a tree and turning it into a book. The value is in what makes that book. And I think consumers themselves often don't understand that just because it's a digital file doesn't mean that it's free, that there's a cost. And when I was at the Paris Book Fair a few weeks ago, I met with a publisher, Kobo, a French publisher. And the model that they were looking at, which I absolutely adored, was a sliding royalty structure. They invest so much money in their authors, and the publisher needs to make that money back. Thus, authors make a smaller royalty. But what happens after they've made their money back? The royalty stays the same. So one of the things that I love that they're doing is they're looking at, so what happens over time as this moves into our backlist and becomes something that we're making less money on and the author is potentially making more on with the, it's the long tail that's selling. So they can move on to continue to publish their front list books. And they're trying a sliding scale for their authors, which I think shows that they respect, that they're not always going to make the majority of the money on that book, that they have to make their money back, which is key. An author has to make their money back, a publisher has to make their money back. And I love seeing publishers experiment like that.
That's brilliant. I would just add, do for the writer what the writer can't do for themselves.
And I just wanted to add as well that one of the most popular posts we ever had on the site was a piece called Follow the Editor, which was by a writer called Jeff Norton. And he made the point that in film and music, we often know those producers and we know them very well. We very often don't know the names of really good editors who have a fantastic eye at curating content and finding great writers. And I think we mustn't lose that in this conversation, that there's a huge range of people that can spot talent and will understand the market and how it's going to sell.
Any other questions?
Can I ask a question? Mark, a question. I work for Penguin Books. I'm not seeking to defend Penguin Books' acquisition or Pearson's acquisition of Author Solutions, but could you talk to the idea beyond sales and marketing of what the interests, if you like, for the self-published author are if you're not publishing straightforward black and white text? Because I think there's a clear creative and product difference between a monotext and an illustrated text. And I believe, but don't know because Author Solutions is a separate company and the Pearson family, that there is quite a big difference in the two products. And I think that's where there might be a difference in the value add process in the product creation.
So are you suggesting that for more complex books, that there's an opportunity for publishers to add more value that writers can't add themselves?
Yeah, I would say if I've written, say, a crime thriller, I'd write it in Word. It would be dead easy to write, create the actual product that someone can read. But if I was creating a manual or something which involved lots of pictures and diagrams and non-straightforward layout, I would say that that is going to be more complex for me to create a digital product from.
Even that is still pretty simple for writers to put together themselves. They can go on to odesk.com or elance.com and hire, professional artists, researchers. They can hire anything to put that book together. I really think one of the best opportunities for publishers to add that value is on the editorial side. That's something that the writers can't do for themselves. Your ability to take a good book and turn it into a great book is something that writers really value. I mean, most writers really value the editorial. I think if you go back in time, in history, back 30 years ago, before the consolidation happened in the publishing industry, I think it was a time when editors were the heart and soul of publishers. That they, and I think we've lost a little bit of that with all the consolidation, where we've got the financial bean counters who are now making more decisions, where an acquiring editor can't acquire a book until they sell it to the sales force, to the finance department. So I think if publishers can embrace the editorial side to put together great books, I think that's the path forward.
We've got time for one more question. This chap here.
Hi, I'm Eric Hellman from Gluejar. I want to ask about advances. Is the advance dead?
Stina?
No, my book went to auction, and I ended up with a quite nice six-figure deal, and I'm a self-published, no name to start. So I don't, on my end, I don't think so, and I know of quite a few other indie authors who have received large advances. I also know a lot who have received smaller, but it all depends on their genre, from what I understand.
I think advances have to come down so that publishers have the resources necessary to take more chances on more writers. But I think there'll also be a difference, where there's fiction and nonfiction, and they're two different worlds. I think there's still a really important role for the advance in nonfiction works where the publisher is actually funding the development of that book so the writer can go off and write it. So maybe we'll see the advances drop first in fiction.
I think one of the challenges with a large advance is if a first-time author with that publisher gets a huge advance, most books don't earn out their advance. That's not a good thing for the author. It's not a good thing for the publisher, because when the author writes their second book and the publisher now uses the tools to look into the marketplace and to see, oh boy, we're going to get hit with returns, this book lost money. I'll of a six-figure advance here, I'm going to have to borrow fare so I can take the bus back to my hotel. But because my advance was so small that I was happy to know that even if this was a major screw-up, I was going to earn out my advance pretty quickly. And then got a bigger advance on the second book. So it was one of those things working with my publisher where I started off with a smaller advance and earned the right to have a bigger advance based on the sales history, rather than here's your six-figure deal, good luck. And throwing the author into deep water right away isn't always a good thing for the publisher or the author.
Okay, we're going to have to finish. Thanks very, very much. If you can show your appreciation for the panel, it would be much appreciated.
Thank you.